During the Ming times, or during the Qing times, they had some settlements, but not the entirety of the land. The first country that controlled the entirety of Taiwan was actually Japan. And right now, Taiwan is a democratic country. They have their own government, they have their own army, they have their own financial system. They have their own set of values, their own culture, their own languages. It's a very multicultural, developed country. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Freedom is Not Free channel. Today I wanted to share with you one topic that has been widely discussed on the Taiwanese internet and on the Chinese internet as well. We're going to talk about the latest Al Jazeera's interview, latest Al Jazeera's TV show with Victor Gao, who used to be an interpreter and a translator for Chinese leader, Chinese dictator Deng Xiaoping. And they have invited him to take part in that panel discussion in London. And what I wanted to say, it's a very good program. The people they've invited on that panel are also pretty interesting. You see real human rights activists, you see journalists, you see professors, and of course you also see Chinese shills. As well as people in the audience, you also see people who suffered from the CCP's oppression. You see Uyghur people, you see Tibetan people. And the host, Manny, is also a very insightful person, so I really enjoyed watching it. But today I wanted to focus your attention on some blatant lies and CCP propaganda coming from Victor Gao's mouth, and what are the main fallacies of those people who support the dictatorial regime of the CCP. Well, let's start with the first question that Victor Gao actually failed to answer. Manny asked him about Chinese military expansionism, and why are China's neighbors like Japan, like the Philippines, like Vietnam, why do they have concerns about the raising military budget of China? And as usual, as every CCP shill, Victor Gao said, oh yeah, we have very big military budget, but it's just a fraction of what the United States has.
Military spending is the second largest in the world, but it is only a fraction of that of the United States.
So, whenever you ask them questions, they will tell you about America and how bad America is. This is called whataboutism. They never answer your questions directly.
For China's defensive in nature.
And saying that China is peaceful, that China didn't start wars, like what that guy in the panel said, like the professor who is in Tsinghua University in China. It's also a blatant lie. And it's a shame that there are foreigners, that there are people from the Western countries, from the democracies, that right now live and work in China and are shilling for the CCP, for this dictatorial regime. People in the West fought for their democracy, not to live in a dictatorial hellhole like what China is right now. And you see people coming from the West and trying to whitewash that kind of thing. So let's start with the first thing, China's expansionism. It's pretty obvious that after Xi Jinping got the whole amount of power in his hands, the first thing he started doing was actually military reform. So you see mass cleansing within China's military and how he's trying to rearrange the Chinese army. And you see how Chinese military aggression has been rising, for example, in the South China Sea, where they use the gray zone warfare tactics, harassing the Philippines, harassing Vietnam, harassing all the countries that have their territories on the islands in the South China Sea. And I'm not even mentioning their aggression against Taiwan, that the amount of those Chinese planes harassing Taiwan's airspace and actually intruding into Taiwanese airspace, it has been on the rise. And during their military drills, some of the shells, they fell within the Japanese territorial waters. So this is worrying. And saying that China didn't start a war? Okay, China invaded Tibet, China invaded East Turkestan. China had multiple military clashes with India. China also had a war with Vietnam. China had a war with Russia, with the Soviet Union at that time. And I'm not even mentioning multiple aggressions against Taiwan. And that Korean War was basically fought by the Chinese communist soldiers against the South Korean army. And there is another thing, China's military budget is on the rise. You see them establishing military bases around the world, in African countries, in Central Asia. You see them harassing their neighbors in the South China Sea, them harassing Taiwan, also multiple espionage operations in Europe, in the UK, also in the United States. So of course everyone is worried about China's military, because China is not a democracy. China is not a friendly neighbor. What they want to do is harass you, steal from you, and cheat on you. So that's a legitimate question that Victor Gao failed to answer. China's military expansionism is not for peace, it's for expansionism.
How you quoted the military figures and so on, but China has not fought any wars since 1979.
Well, even though he corrected himself by saying that China didn't have any wars since 1979, but 1979 is when there was Sino-Vietnamese War, and in 1988 there was also Johnson-South Reef Skirmish, and in 1995, which most Taiwanese people remember, is the Taiwan Strait Crisis. 2012, Scarborough Shoal incident, where Kurt Campbell showed his incompetence, and in 2020 we're having military clashes with India. So trying to portray China as some kind of a peaceful country is a blatant lie. And now let's talk about the most crucial for me, as Taiwan is also my home, part of this interview. When Victor Gao not only denied Taiwan all the rights for self-determination, but he also called for ethnic cleansing in Taiwan.
Once we get the island back, we'll have to ask everyone's origins. Those who have Japanese ancestry, who you basically say can constitute 10% of the population, will have to pledge loyalty to reunification in writing, otherwise we'll have to help them leave. You're basically calling for the ethnic cleansing of 2.3 million people in Taiwan.
Once Taiwan is reunified with China, which is also ridiculous, Taiwan has never been a part of China. You cannot reunify with something that has never been ruled by that country, right? He said that all the people who have Japanese ancestry, which is around 10% of Taiwan's population, will be asked either to support the reunification or they will be kicked out of Taiwan. That sounds pretty much how Nazi Germany treated Jewish people before the Second World War. And let's talk about the mantra that all of those CCP supporters are saying. Like, they say that Taiwan is a part of China, and the government of the People's Republic of China is a part of one China and stuff like that. But it basically is just a mantra. No matter how many times do you read it out loud, this won't make Taiwan a part of China. I think the CCP is actually something like a religion. They gather up together and they read those mantras that CCP is the greatest power on earth, as well as things like Taiwan is a part of China, Taiwan is a part of China. Saying that multiple times doesn't make it a part of China. Taiwan has never been ruled by the People's Republic of China. The entirety of Taiwan was also never controlled by any empire, by any government that existed in China. This is pretty simple, because during the Ming times, or during the Qing times, they had some settlements, but not the entirety of the land. The first country that controlled the entirety of Taiwan was actually Japan. And right now, Taiwan is a democratic country. They have their own government. They have their own army. They have their own financial system. They have their own set of values, their own culture, their own languages. It's a very multicultural, developed country that is cooperating with the whole world. And how dare you say that Taiwan is a part of China? I have never seen any building in Taiwan that has 5-star red flags. I have never seen any CCP official in Taiwan. Taiwan is very different from Hong Kong, where you have a lot of CCP people there. Taiwan is ruled by its own government, and they elect their own representatives. They elect their own president. How many people voted for Xi Jinping? 2,000 something. And who got them elected? That's a very good question, because China doesn't have a transparent democratic system. They are a one-party dictatorship that is actually turning into a cult of personality and a personalistic dictatorship, which is even worse, because before everything was concentrated in the hands of the CCP. Right now everything is concentrated within the hands of Xi Jinping, a single person, a single dictator. And what Manny said correctly, Chinese people, they have to study Xi Jinping thought. They have Xi Jinping thought within Chinese constitution. He probably is the only Chinese leader who actually has written his name in the Chinese constitution. And you say that this country should rule over Taiwan? Taiwanese people don't identify as Chinese. There have been multiple polls, and it is only 2% of the people that actually consider themselves Chinese. Most people consider themselves Taiwanese.
It's not up to the people in Taiwan to decide about the one China policy.
And if you ask them if they want to be a part of the same country with China, nobody would agree to do that. The only problem Taiwan has right now is an outdated constitution, because it was left over by the Chiang Kai-shek regime when they came to Taiwan, actually also unlawfully. And there is also a problem with the name of the state. But nevertheless, Taiwan is a totally different country. It is not a part of China. It has never been a part of China. It will never be a part of China. And Taiwanese people don't want to be a part of China. This is the most important thing, legally speaking, because Victor Gao mentioned Japan many times. When Japan renounced its rights over Taiwan, Japan didn't renounce it in favor of China, any kind of China. And all the agreements that Japan has with any kind of Chinese government, they don't mention that Japan is renouncing its rights, its sovereignty over Taiwan to China. It's just renouncing it. And according to international law, sovereignty over Taiwan should belong to the Taiwanese people. And it is up for the Taiwanese people to decide a part of which country do they want to be, or they want to be their own thing. And I think they have made a decision, they vote in their elections, and they have their own beautiful democratic state, which I pretty much recommend everyone visit. And also the people within the CCP are very jealous of how strong Taiwan's passport is. Taiwanese people can go without visa pretty much to any developed country. They can go to the United States, they can go to any of the European countries, they can go to the UK, they can go to Australia, they can go to Canada. And Chinese, they have to apply for a visa. That probably is also not making them pretty much happy, and that's probably why everyone understands that China and Taiwan are totally different entities. And now let's talk about Uyghur genocide and mass human rights violations that are going on in China. When Maddie asked Victor questions about Uyghur genocide and provided different kinds of data from the Freedom House or from Amnesty International, there are 500,000 people being detained in Xinjiang, in Turkestan, in the Uyghur region. And there is also data confirming that there is 1 million people being detained in China. But it's very hard to get the exact information because of how closed up China is and how non-transparent it is. Victor didn't answer anything. He said that Uyghurs are happy.
The Uyghurs are a proud ethnic group, one of the 56 ethnic nationalities in China. The Uyghurs, as far as I'm concerned, are my true brothers and sisters. I know many of them. I travel to Xinjiang regularly, and I talk to many of the Uyghurs.
And that Xinjiang is a very stable region within. And when journalists, researchers, and activists whose family members got detained, whose family members got imprisoned, and whose family members cannot get in contact with them, for example, like Rayhan Assad's brother, she has lost contact with him, and she knows that he is imprisoned. That's it. Victor Gao, of course, he couldn't answer anything. He first invited many to visit Xinjiang, but when he was asked the question if he can go there without any minders, he said it's not up to him to decide.
I do not make that decision.
There also has been data provided by the Chinese government saying how many detainees are there in Xinjiang. And there are researchers like Adrian Zenz actually gathered that data and wrote papers about poor Uyghurs being detained and being imprisoned. I have also interviewed some camp survivors, and what these people have been through, I don't wish anyone to experience. And it is disgusting when those CCP officials are trying to say that Uyghurs are happy. They don't have any basic human rights. They don't have any religious rights. They're not permitted to speak their language. What they made out of Xinjiang, out of the very beautiful and the cultural country of East Turkestan, they basically made a Uyghur Disneyland out of it. They turned down all of the Asian mosques, Asian cities, and built up facades that look like Central Asian culture. Right now there is more and more foreign YouTubers going there and saying, you see, the Uyghurs are dancing, that means that they're happy. I think we can all see it through those lies. And I wish that Uyghur people can get their freedom one day, and that they will see a beautiful country of East Turkestan. And there also was a Tibetan British person who asked why can't he go back to Tibet and contact his family. And Victor Gao also could not answer that question. What is interesting, he said that if you don't support one China, you will be imprisoned and you will be followed by the law. But when he was asked, but you change the law all the time, and when you imprison a person, it may be one thing, but the next day they found out that that's a totally different thing. Or they can amend the law particularly for that person. Is that a rule of law country? Of course he couldn't answer that. They also like to disappear people, like Qin Gang, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, or Li Shangfu, former Minister of Defense of China. They both disappeared and nobody knows where they are. When asked about it, he just said that, oh, each country has its own regulations. The last thing I wanted to discuss with you is how he compared Xi Jinping to a monarch. Because when he was asked if Xi Jinping is a dictator, of course he denied it. He said that Xi Jinping is not a dictator and there is a process and the Chinese people decide for their leadership to be chosen. But the funniest thing is that he said that British people cannot criticize the monarch. Yes, they do. Anyone can say that they don't like King Charles. Victor Gao said that you cannot take any action to actually get rid of the monarch, but you can. Within the legal system, of course you can. You can also take legal action to secede from the United Kingdom, like what Scotland did. They had a referendum, right? Which is not possible in China. If people don't want to be within one China, they'll be persecuted and murdered, or their organs would be harvested. But he said you cannot criticize King Charles. And then, that's even more funny. When Maddie asked him how many people were there on a ballot for Xi Jinping, he said it was only one. Xi Jinping himself, right? And then he said how many people were there on a ballot for King Charles.
You have
You
a
can say
succession
my name multiple
of the
times,
king after
but
the
it's a
queen.
dictatorship.
How many candidates are there on the ballot paper?
How many? What? King and queen?
When the king succeeds the queen,
Yes.
how many candidates are there on the ballot paper?
How many?
King Charles is a monarch. He doesn't have any real political power in the UK's legal system. He reigns but doesn't rule. Xi Jinping, though, is an absolute monarch. And saying that China is a democracy, with Xi Jinping being an actual monarch and compared with a monarch, I don't think that Victor Gao even understands what he's talking about. I think it was a very interesting show. It gave you pretty much an insight to what is the CCP's political behavior and how do they treat their own people. They treat their own people as idiots and disobedient slaves, and they also treat the people abroad as idiots and obedient slaves that should follow with the one China bullshit that they're trying to spread around. But it also showed a very worrying thing, especially that professor guy, a visiting professor in Tsinghua University. He's British, and when he was asked about pandemic in China, he said that China performed very well.
I beg to differ on the question of the pandemic, because actually for 2 years, 2020 and 2021, actually China did, under the circumstances, extremely well.
But it is also a lie, and it has been confirmed that the information about COVID coming out from China was false. And we don't know how many people died from COVID in China. And then when he was asked about China's military spending, he said that China didn't start any wars. But I just gave you examples. How many wars did China start? China is the only country in the world, in the entire world, that has conflicts with every single neighboring nation. Territorial conflicts, starting with Vietnam, India, Taiwan, Central Asian nations, even Russia. So I hope that you guys see that show, and I hope that we can all unite together to support people that suffer in China, and to support a nation of Taiwan that is being harassed by China constantly. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please press like, subscribe, and share. And remember that freedom is not free.